Cool. Well, hello everyone. If you would like a transcript of this presentation, please let me know after the presentation, and I will provide that for you if anyone would like that for accessibility purposes. It'd be a bit remiss of me to do a talk like this and not provide a transcript, but I haven't written one. So if anyone does need one at the end, please let me know and I'll provide that. My name's Chris. I am a software engineer at Passenger Technology Group, and I'm also an organizer of PHP Dorset, if you can see on my t-shirt. Kind of, I guess, a sister or brother of PHP Hampshire, with kind of neighbours, aren't we? Yeah, so I work at Passenger Technology Group, and we're 24, 25 strong now, I think. We just hired another person this week. That's me on the left. We all have these very nice avatars, which our designer puts together for us. And that's me, yeah, it's me just down there. We have a few developers. There's 10 developers at the company at the moment. And of those, 7 of them are PHP developers. So that's our little PHP team. When I put this presentation together, we weren't hiring, but recently we now have a new position open. If anyone is interested in joining our team, we're looking for a PHP developer for our commerce team specifically. So let me know if that's something that interests you. And what we do is transport. So specifically buses and sometimes trams, but yeah, most of the time we do buses. Lots of buses, in fact. So this is one of our screens from one of our websites. This is Nottingham City Centre, and you can see we're tracking all of the buses that are going around transporting people in and out of the middle of Nottingham. And here's a little video that was put together at the start of the year, which shows a day in the life of our vehicle tracking. So we've got 2 products, a premium product and a more kind of budget product. The budget one is the yellow and the premium one's the pink. So we're covering a lot of the UK already, and we plan to take over the UK and then maybe the world. We'll see what happens. Probably a few more hires between them and taking over the world. So at Passenger, we offer a lot of services. So we do digital ticketing, we do journey planning, timetables, real-time information, and then some more kind of customizable options depending on what the operator wants to pay us for. Things like B2B marketing and things like that. We do bike share integration. We've just added scooters as well, so that's a new thing. And we offer those products over iOS and Android websites. They're on the main 2, and then we have WhatsApps and voice assistant stuff and big screen displays, that sort of thing. So one of our core values is empathy and inclusivity. And part of being empathetic and inclusive is accessibility. So I want to share with you, to start off with, 3 reasons to tell your boss why accessibility is important. So I'd like to think everyone who's come along today here is interested in accessibility. And the hardest part of accessibility, I think, is nothing to do with implementing it, but it's getting buy-in, convincing the people who make the decisions, who call the shots, who have the purse strings at your company, why you should be spending time on accessibility. So the first one is brand perception. So brand loyalty isn't what it used to be. My nan would be ashamed or even embarrassed if she was in a different supermarket to her regular one. Times have changed a lot since then. Customers maybe aren't quite that loyal as maybe my nan was back in, good kind of 80 years ago. But customers are still loyal to brands, and they do that by choosing brands that align with their morals and their values. So whether that's they want to follow a brand that's ditching plastic straws in an attempt to show that it cares about climate change, or paying staff a decent wage for the work they do, or showing that they support the disabled even though they don't pay taxes. Whatever company, a lot of them out there will try and show that they're empathetic to the disabled. Market reach is another big one. So you can find a lot of stats out there, like these ones. So 14.1 million disabled people in the UK, 69% of which are banned on online transactions due to accessibility issues. And older people will be spending 63p in every pound spent. They're just some facts that I pulled off the internet. Apologies, I don't have the references for that, but you should always take these things with a pinch of salt. But there's a lot of big numbers that you can go out there and find which will support your argument as to why your business could be making more money than it is where it's not being accessible. And the third one is it's the law. Apparently you can be slapped with some very hefty fines for not being accessible, although I believe the risk of going to court is quite low. And as I've got on the screen there, the EU has adopted WCAG 2.0, so that's the Web Accessibility Guidelines. And by 2025, that's going to become law. As to what impact that will actually have on your business, I don't know, but telling your boss that you could be fined if you're not accessible, that can help convince them that it's maybe something they should be paying attention to. So WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. You can go and read these, and they are quite extensive, but they essentially come down to 4 key concepts, which is perceivable. So this refers to the way that users perceive content through their senses, so sight, sound, touch. So that's really, we're talking about things like video captions and color contrast, stuff like that. Operable means they can navigate via the everyday means of a mouse and keyboard, so they can use just the keyboard or just the mouse or a touch pad or something completely different, maybe voice assistant, something like that. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to go that far ahead. Understandable, so that's simple language, avoiding jargon, providing step-by-step instructions, keeping it easy for anyone to understand. Being consistent as well as your approach is just as important. So not moving menus around on different screens, stuff like that. And and using iconography as well, being consistent with that. So even if the person isn't maybe a native speaker of your language, that they can work out what's going on and what to click on without needing to know the language by being able to tell what's in the places they expect to find things. And robust, which is just all about clean and valid HTML, CSS really. Follow standards that follow the standards like the Web Accessibility Guidelines, and making sure your website and your apps work with assistive text like screen readers, that sort of thing. So you can break those down into loads of different more specific guidelines, but from a top level, from 100 feet up, that's what the guidelines are about. But I want to really share with you 5 reasons why accessibility is important to me. That's not to say those 3 reasons aren't important, but there are reasons why I do accessibility as part of my job and try to champion it with other people. So the first one is that I'm most likely temporarily abled. So it's not me. I'm not necessarily disabled, but it could be me. Not everyone will encounter a disability, so that's why I put most likely. The term temporarily abled or temporarily able body gets used a lot actually online, and some of the disabled community do take issue with that. And that's because you could go your whole life without an issue. You could be one of the lucky ones that do, or you could die tomorrow. So you may never encounter a problem with accessibility. But I think it's fair to say that most of us in our lives at some point will encounter a disability of some kind, whether that's a permanent disability, like losing an arm or being blind, something like that. Or it may be something more temporary. So it's funny, at the moment, I've sprained my hand when I fell over playing football last week. So I've had trouble typing this week. That you could have a cataracts or ear infection, laryngitis I've had before, so I've been unable to speak for a week. We all kind of phase in and out of being fully abled. And it could be situational as well. So sometimes there are things that are happening around your environment which reduce your ability to do things, not necessarily to do with your own body. Modern lifestyles as well are also leading to more disability. So, fast food, the amount of cars on the road is ever increasing. We're constantly looking at our screens all the time, and notifications are constantly popping up. So, of course, it's not just physical; it's also mental disability, and being constantly connected and online and social can cause issues there. And of course, if you're like me, you spend most of your day sat down at a desk. So that's not good for our health either. And it's funny, I went to the opticians this week. So I just highlighted here from our avatars the people in our company that wear glasses. And technically, that's a disability. So poor eyesight is one of those kind of forgotten about disabilities. And that's because we have the technology to improve it, eye correcting lenses. And it's kind of a fashion thing now, if anything. So as tech builders, we don't need to do anything in particular to accommodate someone who uses glasses or contact lenses. But glasses do break and contact lenses do fall out and get lost. So it would still be good if our websites and apps could be used even if you have blurred vision. So some disabilities are quite obvious. Here's some examples: blind, amputee, paralysis, vision impaired, arthritis, doesn't speak English, has no opposable thumbs. All these people may have accessibility issues when using one of our apps or our products. There's also a lot of not so obvious ones. Just from looking at a person, you can't tell really if any of these are issues that they may be suffering from. You don't, when you pass someone in the street, you have no idea what challenges that they face in life. The second point I want to make is that life expectancy is on the rise. So a child born in Japan in 2007 will have a more than 50% chance of living past the age of 107 now. And children born in that year in the most advanced economies will have similar odds of getting past their 100th birthday. So although we'll be living longer, disability issues that come with old age won't necessarily be solved so quickly, although technology is always getting better all the time. But loss of eyesight, hearing, motor functions, mental disability, these are all going to be things that affect us as we get older, and we, hopefully will all become old, and so will the people around us. So we want to make sure that what we're building now and what we're designing for now works for the future version of us. A third one is one you may not have heard of at all, but inaccessibility leads to unemployment, and society foots that bill. So we make things most of the time that people either use at work or to get to work or for entertainment. But entertainment itself then promotes more jobs and more employment elsewhere. And that's certainly true of passenger. We make stuff that helps people get to work. And retirement age is also rising. That's another one. So people are working older, longer. And this was a really interesting thing I found, that a 10% rise in employment rate amongst disabled adults in the UK would contribute an extra 12 billion to the exchequer by 2030. So by making stuff that's accessible that people can use to do their jobs, more people can be employed, and that helps society, it helps our economy. And if these people are unable to get jobs, then we all foot the bill of that as taxpayers. I didn't have a good picture to pick for this, so I just picked a picture of Rishi Sunak in a pub. Number 4 is augmented reality can really help shoppers. Sorry, I should start reading my notes there. Technology is helping make the world more accessible. So augmented reality can help shoppers find information about a product without needing to necessarily be able to reach it. 3D printers can create cheap new limbs for people who need augments. Smart devices can allow people to use the internet by only using their voice, but they still can't buy a t-shirt from an e-store because it's not accessible. And to me, that's a bit silly. And the 5th one is that we all want to make something awesome for everyone. If it's not accessible, then it's not awesome, is it? So at Passenger Technology Group, I was asked to become Passenger's accessibility champion. You're probably wondering what that is. So to start off with, I was the person who was fixing some of the accessibility issues at the company, which I then, to do that, I needed to do some research. I found out kind of what accessibility issues there could be and how to fix them. And then I shared that with the rest of the team of kind of what I learned, which I'll be passing on to you. And then that led us to resolve some issues and find some more issues. As time progressed, I became less involved with actually fixing the accessibility issues and became more of a champion for expressing why it's important for us to do so and helping other people learn how to spot them and how to fix them themselves. And that's where accessibility champion really came from. So what an accessibility champion is not is necessarily the person who fixes all the accessibility issues. But what they are is someone who may or may not be someone who works directly with the product or service. So I'm an engineer and I'm an accessibility champion, but likewise, your accessibility champion could be someone who works in HR or accounting. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone who works with the product. Accessibility is everyone's responsibility, and I like to think of it like fire safety, in that you have a fire safety officer who comes in and makes sure that all your fire extinguishers work and make sure everyone knows where the exits are and stuff. But from that point on, it's everyone's responsibility to make sure the gangways are clear and there aren't, you're not putting hot stuff near flammable stuff. That's everyone's responsibility. And I think accessibility falls under the same sort of remit. I've lost myself in my notes. Oh, okay, yes. So another thing an accessibility champion is not is the person who complains the most about the product not being accessible. So that might be me at one point in time, but that doesn't define the accessibility champion. Anyone can raise an accessibility issue as a ticket, whatever ticket tracking you're using. But it is a person who helps educate the team to identify and resolve those accessibility issues. So again, this is something that I was doing a lot of, and now over half the tickets in our JIRA have been tagged, that are tagged with accessibility, have been raised by people who aren't me, and less than half of them are also assigned to me to fix. So it's a shared responsibility. What have I put there? Oh, may be responsible for or assisting in triaging. Yeah, so that essentially means that in some companies, the accessibility champion may be one of the people who helps prioritize or triage the issues as they come in and decides which ones are most important. In my case, that's not actually me. I don't directly have a say in which tickets we action. I'm just one of the people who helps raise them, but I'll be often involved in the discussions on those tickets to help try and push the ones that I feel are important forward to the top of the backlog. Another thing accessibility champion is it's not the person responsible if the product service is not accessible. So just because there were issues with our product that weren't accessible. Doesn't mean that that was my fault just because I'm called the accessibility champion internally. It is, though, someone who's responsible for embedding accessibility, and I've used the shorthand for accessibility there, A11Y, into the day-to-day business. So it's my responsibility to make sure that this is always a conversation that's being had, and it's not something we forget about. And that if that does become the case, then you could argue that that is my fault for not bringing it up enough, not making sure that people are thinking about it enough. Yeah, so ensuring accessibility is regularly at the forefront of conversation and helping deliver processes and practice to ensure good standards. So that's where things like internal talks come in, documentation, making sure that people, when they're new starters, can go and find information about our approach and our process, that sort of thing. An accessibility champion is not someone who knows everything there is to know about accessibility. So I'm only at the start of my journey, if anything. I'm still a hell of a lot to learn, particularly where I don't have any real accessibility challenges myself. I'm always keen to learn a lot from the people who do actually face these challenges on a day-to-day basis. But I am someone who knows some things about accessibility. I'm not sure you could be accessibility champion, day one of starting in a job role at the start of your career as a junior developer, but you don't have to be the senior developer or the expert necessarily to do this role. Yeah, I share existing knowledge with other employees at the business and investing time keeping up to date. So I will try and keep my finger on the pulse, and I follow a lot of accessibility articles and Twitter feeds and things like that. And then again, passing on that knowledge, so kind of rounding the cycle of learning and then sharing. So that's probably me talking about enough about what the role is. And I thought I would go into some talks that I've actually given internally to the rest of the team about some accessibility things in much more specifics, because that's what I think will probably be the most useful thing I could pass on. And I'm going to start with accessible images. So this is a talk that was requested by our marketing manager, because she wanted to know a little bit more about how to make her images accessible when she was making blog posts and articles and things like that. And I thought this was going to be a very short talk. I thought I'd maybe put together 3 slides, and yeah, there wouldn't be a lot to cover. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized how wrong that was. So you'll join me on this journey. And I found these slides online. This is just a SlidesGo presentation for a photo gallery, and it already had this image in it. And it said, just had this Polaroid photo, and it said, this is Pepe. So that's what I used. I just used it straight out of the box and thought, that'll do. So when we're marking up images, one of the things we can do is we add a title attribute, which is essentially a tooltip. And this is not helpful in any way, really, in terms of accessibility. So it doesn't help mobile phone users, keyboard users, screen magnifier users, screen reader users, users with fine motor skill impairments, users with cognitive impairments. It's not useful to any of those people. And it's been superseded now by ARIA label for anything like a form or anything like that. So it's not completely useless, but as far as accessibility goes, it is. Captions, however, are very good. So a caption is usually something that appears above or below an image and provides context to what that image is. So you'd usually use a caption for something like who is in the image or who took the photo or what the copyright is. And that's useful for all users. It's not hidden away from those apart from screen readers or anything like that. It's something that you would show on the screen and that everyone can read. But to give screen readers a chance, you need to make sure it's marked up correctly. So you do that using a fig caption element, which lives inside a figure element. So it sits at the same level as the image. And that means that when the screen reader comes along and interprets this, that it knows that that caption is related to that image. This is so we use WordPress for our blogging, and this is an example of a fig caption. Or on the left is where we hadn't. So I found in our blog a place where we hadn't used WordPress's caption feature, and the caption had just been put below as a piece of text. And then on the right is an example where we had actually used the caption, and you can see that it's by hovering over it that it's got the correct markup as a fig caption. So that means the screen reader will be able to help associate that bit of text to that image when it reads it out. And then we've got alt, which is probably the one you've heard of when it comes to accessibility. So an alt is an accurate, concise description of an image. So this is a photo of Pepe. But that's not particularly useful as an alt. It doesn't tell the user who can't see that photo of Pepe what Pepe is or what Pepe looks like or anything that's of any particular usefulness other than his name's Pepe, which really we would be putting in a caption for this image. For alts, you don't need to put I can never say this word, sorry, superfluous information. I think it's a French word. Like photo of or image of, anything descriptive like that really doesn't come into it. So we don't even need to put a photo of Pepe. I mean, it's a photo. Sometimes you might need to, such as painting or cartoon impression, that sort of thing, but most of the time it's useless. So now my alt is just Pepe, but again, that doesn't really help us much. So to be an accurate, concise description, what I've written here is Pepe, a brown and white teacup chihuahua, which is a better description of what is in that image. So a good rule of thumb to consider here is what you might relay over the phone if you're trying to describe a picture or describe something to someone that couldn't see it. And when combined with the caption, I maybe don't have to put quite so much in that alt because it's already available in the caption. So just a brown and white teacup chihuahua, and then the caption says this is Pepe, and that gives all users what they need to be able to know what that image is about. Another good rule of thumb is to consider what you might Google for if you were trying to find a photo that looked like that photo. So a photo of Pepe isn't a very good alt tag for that image because it's not a very good search query. When I did that, I found this is Pepe, the Arsenal midfielder. So what I was actually looking for was photos more like this, which is when I searched for a brown and white teacup chihuahua, I found photos that looked like my photo of Pepe. So yeah, when considering if the image doesn't load, so the different use cases for the alt is if the image doesn't load at all, it could be because it's a faulty URL or the image has a permission error or something like that. Screen readers, but also search engines, because this photo of Pepe, now I've tagged it, I've given it that alt, the spider will come along and also read that alt text and associate that alt text with brown and white teacup chihuahuas, and then my image might pop up in a Google image result, so more people are likely to find it. And then we get on to talking about context. So the thing with context is it's not just a case of writing about the photo. So if it was, we could just get AI to do all of our alt text for us, because things like Google and stuff have got very smart at looking at an image and interpreting that image and telling us what's in that photo. The reason we don't do that, and the reason we need to write all our alts ourselves, is because we need to add the context as to why that photo or the contents of that photo is relevant to us putting it in that article or that blog post or whatever it is. So this could be in the context of a military biography, this photo, or it could be in an article about painting techniques of the 1700s, or it could be what Star Wars characters would look like if they were Civil War generals. And based on the context, we would write a different alt to describe what we wanted to put across. So in the context of military biography, we might put portrait painting of General Thompson in military uniform. For painting techniques of the 1700s, this might be an oil painting of a general using the Flemish technique, because that's the important thing. We want to tell the user that the photo is showing. Or it might be Obi-Wan Kenobi depicted as a Civil War general, because we're talking about Star Wars characters. Text as part of the image. Again, this is something that I think a lot of us will have come across as something that's not really useful for screen readers, for search engines, or for visually impaired users. And again, we would put the text in an alt tag for that. So here I put a brown and white teacup chihuahua, he loves walkies. And then you've also got text as part of an image, which is a link. So the text on this image tells the user the action the link performs. In this case, going to the adoptions page. And that's not always obvious from looking at the URL. It might be that it is obvious from the URL, but sometimes the URL could just be a load of random gibberish and not make any sense to anyone. And you don't want your screen reader user to have to read out the whole URL to try and work out where that link goes or what that image is for. So yeah, as I just said, it's not always clear from the URL. So I put an alt text here that says adoption page for Pepe. And that tells the user where the link goes, but not necessarily what the image is. So the best thing to do is try and combine the two. So this says adoption page for Pepe, a brown and white teacup chihuahua, which hopefully gives you all the information you need to know at that point. This is an image that I picked out of our blog and an example of the alt text that you can put into WordPress using the Gutenberg editor. This guy called Harry Gratian here, standing in front of a bus that was named after him. And the bus reads, "Thank you, Harry." I went and looked for similar images online. So I typed in Harry Gratian bus just to see what other kind of alt tags were being used. And the first one on the left there said, Harry arrives at the BBC, Norfolk Studios aboard a Harrogate bus, company double-decker that's been named after him. So there's a few bits of information there that's maybe I hadn't picked out that might have been useful for me to include in my alt, that it was a double-decker bus. That helps the user imagine what that might look like. And also that he was, in this case, he was aboard the bus. On the other end of the scale, we've got Harry Gratian and the 36 bus, which is less informative. But if you work with bus operators like we do, you'll find that they really care about things like the fact that it was the 36 bus. So writing an alt for something like this image, that gets a bit more challenging because there's a lot of information that could be conveyed there. And you certainly wouldn't write an alt that tried to describe each bar of that bar chart and the values and all that. So this is where long descriptions come in. So I can summarize what's in that image. I put here a bar chart of an annual unit sales between 2004 and 2017. It doesn't necessarily show all the values across that period, but at the very least just shows kind of a summary of what that image is and what it represents. Just turn the light on. Yes, so if we wanted to give a user access to the information that's inside that bar chart, but they can't see the image, we can still do that. So you can use area described by, as an attribute to essentially say that what you would have seen in this image can also be gathered from looking at this different element that you will be able to interpret. So in this case, I've got a table here which represents exactly the same information that's in that bar chart, and I've tagged the image with the ARIA to say you can find this information in this chart, and the screen reader will read that, and then they'll be able to jump to that information and have that read out instead. So it doesn't need to be a separate element. It can be a title attribute or a long desk attribute. But yeah, it can be another element on the page, as long as it's something that has can be found within that page. Or I think you can also put links into other pages as well. And that's something that all users can benefit from as well, because by putting in a good description in there, like a long desk or something like that, then search engines will also appreciate that. And then I tried to do this in WordPress, and I basically found that you couldn't, which was a real shame. So the only way you can actually do this in WordPress, as far as I'm aware, without plugins, is to go and edit it as HTML and do this manually yourself, which is it's a bit of a shame, really. Just a note on SVGs. So these are the same as any other image, but they can provide their own descriptions. So if we look at this SVG here, inside the SVG code, there is a title element, which provides the title. So it doesn't necessarily need to have an alt. At the same time, you can not have a title element and put an alt on it instead. It does essentially the same thing. But the nice thing about having a title, you can also have a description element in there, is that it's portable. It goes with the image, where the image goes. Another note, just to something that caught me out, was that screen readers will read out some things which are inside an SVG attribute. So there's a bit of styling information in here, which when I ran this through a screen reader, the screen reader actually read out that text. So there is a way around this, which is very simple. It's just to add a role attribute, and then the screen reader knows that it's looking at an image and not to try and read out anything that's inside of it. So I'm just going to open my door because there's a fly that's come in and it's annoying me. So hopefully that will leave now. Yeah, and this was the last slide that I had in this presentation, which essentially asked my colleagues to let me know what they want to know about accessibility, because that's just one small topic that I covered. And thankfully, since then, I've been asked to do a few more of these. So as time's gone on, the marketing manager has occasionally asked me to help her with some of the images that she's been putting into our blog posts and articles, and this is one of them. This was quite a challenge. So this is an XKCD comic, and I honestly didn't know how to start trying to describe this in an alt tag. But what we actually ended up with was, we realized that the point of the webcomic being here was to make a point, and that point wasn't covered in the article. It was only represented by the image. So we added the reason, the point of that image being there, into the copy. So here I put, obviously there's a balance to be struck when automating tasks less the time spent. Automating ends up exceeding time saved. That's actually her wording, and we could potentially make that a bit simpler, easier to understand. But it certainly means that the point of the image there is already in the copy. So even if the user can't see the image, they still get the gist of what we're trying to put across in our content. And that meant that this image now just becomes purely you know what I'm trying to say. For illustration purposes, And if you've got an image that's just there for decoration or illustration purposes, then you don't need to provide an alt text. You still need to provide an alt tag. So everything always needs an alt tag, but if it's just there for decoration, you can leave it empty. So this is a debatable one. You could argue that we do need to describe this in some way, but yeah, we came to the conclusion that it was sufficient enough that we had covered this in a way that is accessible for the webcomic to, the article still works without the webcomic actually being there. And now I'm going to go on to a different topic. So I'm just going to have a drink for a second, and then we're going to talk about hyperlinks. So this is another small talk that I gave, which is about writing accessible hyperlinks. So click here. This is a contrived example of a very bad link. And why is this bad? Well, it's because we don't really know where this goes. This link could literally go anywhere. It could go to some relevant content, or it could go to some porn or download a virus. I don't know. We can hover over it and see where that goes. And if you're using a screen reader, the screen reader can read out the URL, but generally you don't want to force your users to try and to have to do that to find out where this link goes. So here's another way I could have done it. I could have put to see our menu, to see our full menu, comma, click here, and had click here be the link. So that solved the problem, right? We know that's going to take us to a menu now. Well, it doesn't, and I'll explain why. But first, a little bit about click here, that this is a mouse thing. So it's quite old school. Less than half devices that are used at the moment from statistics on high-speed internet.net, half of them have a mouse and half of them don't. So people have a variety of ways to interact with a web element, not just clicking. This guy, for example, I apologize to whoever he is, I just pulled this image off the internet. But he can't use his hands, so he uses his mouse and a stick to type and to navigate around. Some people may use voice commands, some people may use touchpads. Ultimately, click is just a bit outdated as a term. So, okay, no click here, that's fine. What about this? Download our full menu. And let's talk about why that's not good enough. So, speech recognition software that will allow a user to avoid using a mouse. Users can speak the text of the link that they would like to follow, and it will follow them, which is fine until you have two links that are called exactly the same. And then you have a bit of a headache as to which one it's going to pick. Speech recognition software can have a bad time trying to work out which one you meant when there's a duplicated link text. And then we have screen readers. So while screen readers can read a full page to a user, screen readers may prefer to instead just list links. And this is quite a common way to navigate around when using a screen reader. And it just takes those links completely out of context and just displays them in a big list so you can pick which link you want to follow. And you can see here that some of these are better than others. So just looking down, I can see that WebAIM, accessible links and hypertext, that tells me where that's going to go, what I'm going to get on the other end. Whereas here or read more doesn't tell me a lot. And again, it just gives you that kind of choice paralysis of I don't know which one to click, which way that's going to go. Yeah, so it's hard to know where these links go. It also highlights why duplicate links on the same page are not such a great idea for the same reason, because I can't tell the difference between one read more and another read more, or even just one that's better, like what to fix. There's two what to fixes on there. So a couple of less contrived examples. oh yeah, sorry, this is a better example. This says download our full menu. So it's a bit more context. It tells us where it's going to go. There's less likely to be duplicates unless we have lots of different menus on the page, in which case we'd be more specific about what you're clicking on. So a couple of less contrived examples. This is taken straight out of the passenger blog. And it's a piece about gender diversity in the workplace. Not that's really important for what I'm talking about, but it's a real example. And this is what was the link. 1.8 times was highlighted as the hyperlink, which on its own doesn't really tell us anything. It's out of context. Don't know where that goes. It does in fact go to this website, which gives a whole article about gender equality in COVID-19. But 1.8 times doesn't really describe that. So we changed that link after a bit of discussion to be around a different piece of text, which was the bit that says research undertaken by McKinsey, because that tells us what it is we're going to be reading when we get there, which is research, and also who it was, who the article is by. So it's got two important words in there to help us know what we're going to get. And it's certainly improvement. We probably could be better, but this doesn't just help screen readers. This helps everyone who's clicking on this link know where they're going to end up. This is another example from the same post. So this one confused me a bit when I first read it. It says research shows are important to female candidates, and I didn't really know what a research show was. And that's because the text around it changes, the grammar of it changes based on the words that have been highlighted. So what it actually says is highlighted details that research shows are important to female candidates. So one thing you can do to improve hyperlinks in these situations is just make them bigger, expand to more text around. You can have a whole sentence as a hyperlink, although bigger is not necessarily better. In this case, we actually improved it by rewriting the copy itself to produce a better result. So this actually ended up going to a PDF about gender insights, which is from LinkedIn. So what we did is we took the link off that piece of text where it was there and added some text at the end of this sentence. So this goes yada, 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 as shown in LinkedIn's Gender Insights report. And that's what we put the link around, because that tells you that when you click on LinkedIn's Gender Insight report, you're going to get LinkedIn's Gender Insights report. Just a quick note on color contrast. So this is a website called contrasttriangle.com. I use a lot, and it helps you get the contrast balance right between text, background, and link text. So if you underline your text, you can see here that in the middle here, this link text, ratio is the word I'm looking for. This ratio is grayed out because it's not important. When text is underlined, even if you couldn't tell the difference between the black color and the blue color, it doesn't matter because you can tell what a link is because it's underlined. But without the underline, we can see that that's not enough contrast. So if you have any kind of color blindness or visual impairment, you will find it harder to tell what a link is and what a link isn't. And that leads me nicely on to my third and final micro talk, which is about interpreting WCAG 2.1 color contrast. So WCAG I talked about a bit earlier. There's version 2, and then there's version 2.1, which is it's a little bit more recent, but added a lot of very good, in my opinion anyway, very good guidelines on making sure things are perceivable, robust, operable. So, oh yes, I forgot I put these slides in. This happened to come up this week. does anyone was anyone aware of when all of the train operating companies changed their websites to be grayscale? I'm going to assume some people were aware of that. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, this was in my opinion, this was very much virtue signaling. I think they were probably told to do it by someone high up, maybe government level, but it was a massive misfire on their part. And the misfire there isn't necessarily because they made their websites black and white, and a lot of them did that very quickly and very poorly by just adding a grayscale filter over at the HTML element level and just making the whole thing grayscale. The fact that they were black and white, a lot of people complained about, saying that that was an accessibility issue. Technically, it's not. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that they weren't accessible to begin with. So for people who can't see color, those problems exist for those people. They would have had the problem that we were all having as people who can see color and couldn't tell the difference between background and text and buttons. People who can't see color already had those problems, and it just highlighted it to the rest of us that these websites weren't accessible. So it was a massive misfire on their step for just implementing that grayscale filter and going, yeah, it'll be fine. And it really wasn't. So, you know, it's nice that we paid our respects back to Prince Philip by making all our websites black and white and more difficult for people to get on trains, because I think that's what he would have wanted. In contrast, though, I don't just want to shout a bad way to do it. I want to show a good way to do it, which is the gov.uk website. And the thing about this is actually taken from their style guide. I've put the link there at the bottom. You can go and see all their style guides on GitHub. And this actually is a custom banner which has been designed into their style guide, into their CSS. It is a component they have specifically for this sort of situation. And they have rules around how the wording works and everything. It's designed for this purpose, and in this respect, this is absolutely fine because it didn't affect the rest of their website. It wasn't inaccessible. In fact, the gov.uk website, kind of love it or hate it, it is a very, very accessible website, and they have gone to great lengths to make sure it is, because it needs to be. So this is a very good example of how to do it. I found this one the funniest because this is the Great Western Railway website, and they made theirs grayscale, but the problem, I don't know if I did highlight it. So on the right there, you can see an extra piece of screenshot, which is from the header bar right at the top there, which is me hovering on the accessibility tools. And when you hover on it, it goes black, so you can't see it, which I just found very ironic. Those accessibility tools, by the way, is something called Recite Me, which is, in my opinion, a company that makes money out of people trying to be accessible by not making their websites accessible. They sell themselves as a company that are there to help make the web accessible for everyone. And in some ways they do achieve that, but in many other ways they don't. On top of the fact that you're adding third-party JavaScript to your websites, so that opens a nice little backdoor into, you know, things like payment pages and things like that. So sorry if anyone here works for that company or has friends there, but in my personal opinion, is that I don't think they actually improve things. And if you want your website to be accessible, you should be making it accessible yourself, not paying for a third-party plugin to try and do that for you. Oh yeah, this was another one, cross-country. They had a button at the bottom which had toggle grayscale, which was ever so slightly better than the rest. But again, it was still a massive misfire, I think, and I'm not sure where that came from. But that does lead me nicely into interpreting color contrast. So here we go. I'll be honest, I haven't given this talk for a while, so I'm going to stumble through this one a bit, sorry. So text needs, according to WCAG 2.1, text needs 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio with the background for text. MyTrip is one of our products, by the way, and it has a yellow and black theme, so I use that as an example here. So we can see that the black there and the dark brown, they work on the white background. I've ticked the ones that pass 4.5 to 1 or higher. And the crosses there, that yellow is not very accessible at all. So we can, we don't need to be colorblind to see that. That's just difficult, color impaired even, not just colorblind. We can all see that that's not a great color, and the same with the slightly lighter brown. And I've linked at the bottom here, I will share these slides. I've linked at the bottom there to where you can go and read about these guidelines. But essentially, that's the rule: 4.5 to 1 for text. And on the black background, it's the other way around. So the yellow is great, and the black really isn't great at all. Dark brown still doesn't work. Nice and simple. You can get away with 3.1 contrast ratio for large text. So large text is described as 24 pixels, not points, which I did make the mistake of once. It is pixels, or 18.5 pixels bold. So you can have small text that's bold or larger text, and you can get away with a slightly different contrast ratio. So in this case, on the left there, that brown at the bottom isn't accessible, but on the right, it is accessible because it's bigger, so it's easier to read, essentially. Yeah, and I've just highlighted there that that is the same on black or white. That one works in that situation, but not at the smaller size. There is such a thing as too much contrast. So technically, this blue and this red have enough contrast between them, but they fall into the issue of being quite garish, and for those people who can see color, it's not, it's difficult to concentrate on. So there's lots of color checkers out there. This one is by far the best in my opinion, which is color.review. There's another one I found recently as well, which is very nice, which I haven't linked in here, but it's called Who Can Use. And that gives you a breakdown of which different color impairments can or can't see your color combination. But what I like about color.review here is that it gives you a color picker, and then it gives you the lines across the screen of where on that kind of color swatch that line is, and you can just adjust the color picker to just, if you want to just fall below or above that line. And it tells you, it's quite small to see, sorry, but it does tell you that text versus headlines. So headlines is what it calls large text or bold, smaller text. This color combination does pass on the headlines, but fails if it was on smaller text because it's only 3.1, 3.4. But it also gives you this page below. There's only a bit of it here, but it's got like almost a whole web page of different features like SVGs and bullet points and things, so you can actually see these colors in action, which is why I quite like it. So text is pretty simple. Buttons are a little bit more complicated. So it's still text, so it needs 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio with the background. So on the right there, yeah, the black on the yellow, that's fine. White on yellow, obviously not so good. But the background doesn't need to have high contrast with the adjacent color. So the adjacent color is what I'm calling the page background here. So in this sense, the button background I picked here is a light gray on a white background. So being able to tell them apart would be quite hard, even as someone with fairly good vision. On a sunny day, for example, if the sun was reflecting on my screen, I'd struggle to tell the difference between those two. But it turns out it doesn't actually matter for a button, as long as you can tell what the text says. you don't have to have that high contrast between the background, which I found quite interesting. The same applies to outlines as well. So with where we've outlined that button there, the yellow and the white doesn't have a great contrast between it, but it's still okay because as long as we can see the text and we can identify it as an element, then it is accessible according, this is all according to the WCAG guidelines. Yes, so in fact, no boundary is required at all to be visible if it retains the contrast with the text. So as long as the text can be read, it really doesn't matter what you do with your button background. But that is providing it has a distinguishing indicator such as position, text style, or context. So we're talking about a button that's, you know, at the bottom of a page or in a nav bar, things like that. If it's kind of really just in line with a bunch of other text that all looks the same, then at that point you probably would need to pick something that has a higher contrast to make it clear that it's a button. But as long as you can tell that it's a button without being able to see the button background, you can essentially do whatever you like. Yeah, and that was my reaction to it. I was very surprised to read that, but and as I said before the start of this talk, this is very much open to interpretation. The WCAG guidelines are quite dense and verbose, and different people have different opinions on this. But this is very much my interpretation of it. So feel free to, you know, if you want to go and read them yourself and work out a different result, then by all means please do, and I'd be happy to kind of debate it back and forth and discuss, because there isn't necessarily a right answer here. One thing I will say though is that users with cognitive disabilities will find these hard to understand. So the clearer you can make your button, you know, make it obvious that it is a button, the better, even if you can get away with having you know, a low contrast between your button and your background. If you can provide a higher contrast one, kind of, well, why wouldn't you? And this is where accessibility crosses into usability and the more kind of umbrella user experience. The WCAG guidelines don't cover those things necessarily. They're just talking strictly about accessibility. I can't remember why I added that there. I think I was just showing another example of a colored background where that darker kind of yellow gold color does pass accessibility, but the lighter one, you know, technically it doesn't matter, but depending on the context, I wouldn't be able to tell whether that was a button or not, depending on how it was used. So a blue star, by the way, is one of our operators, our boss operators. So passing the contrast mass doesn't ensure the best legibility or form. So what I mean by this is a kind of a medium blue, and the white text on this color blue is technically, according to the mass, inaccessible, but the black is accessible. But by my eye, and I think a lot of people probably agree, looking at the screen as it is now, the white is easier to read than the black is. It is nicer than the black, and that's because the WCAG guidelines here don't necessarily take into account the whole context of what we're looking at here. And I put some links down here. This is an interesting journey of Googling where I first came across the myths of color contrast accessibility, which is an article that goes into some opinions about color contrast accessibility. And then I found another one which said there is no myths of color contrast accessibility, which had a whole different bunch of arguments about it. But yeah, so what we're talking about here is context. So as I say, the WCAG guidelines don't necessarily know the whole context, they're just a set of guidelines. But here the context I'm talking about is the background that's around this button. So the white in that top section looks nicer because the background is white to the page and the text is white. So it looks like it's punched out almost. and aesthetically that's more pleasing to the eye, even though it's technically less accessible. The same with the lower one, where we've used the black background. The black text looks aesthetically much nicer. If I make the blue slightly darker until it passes that 4.51 ratio, then we are in fact good in both situations here with white text. And black text wouldn't technically be accessible with that slightly darker blue. And this is what we came across when we were trying to do this for our website. So Blue Star, for example, their blue, that lighter blue, that's their brand color. So we couldn't necessarily just go and change the color of the button to make it darker because they wanted the buttons to be on brand. So what we did instead was we changed the context around it so that we could use the black text, but we could use it in a way that looked more aesthetically pleasing as well. Onto button hover states. This one surprised me as well. There is no requirement to have sufficient contrast between the non-hover and the hover state, provided both have a 4.51 ratio contrast with their text. So that means that the hover essentially isn't important. I've done some examples here on the right, and you can see I've done basically all sorts of different combinations of normal and hover, but the only one that fails is the one where the hover background goes too dark compared to the text, and therefore it's not accessible. When you hover over it, you can't read the text. So a bad hover state is one where when you're on the hover, the text becomes unreadable. But beyond that, it doesn't matter whether that has enough contrast with the normal state or not. So the first one in that list is the best example, where I haven't changed it. It's exactly the same. There's no hover states per se. But again, this is one where it crosses over into usability as well. You know, I think it is good to have a different hover state to make it clear that you're hovering over something, especially a button. But by the guidelines, you don't need to make it accessible, because it will be, as long as by other means you've made it clear that this is a button by its context, its location on the page, its purpose. You know, if it says, you know, add to basket, it's clear that that has an action behind it. Focus states, however, they do need to have a difference. So it must be possible for a person to know which element among multiple elements has keyboard focus. If you're trying to not use the mouse and just tab through a website, you need to be able to see which element is currently active, and the focus state must, this is the thing, the focus state must have a 3:1 ratio with the normal state, but also maintain its 5:1 ratio with the background, between the text and the background. So this essentially boils down to the text always, whatever is going on, your text always needs to have 4.5, whatever it is, because it's text, unless you're talking about something particularly large, which is normal body text, needs to have 4.51 ratio. But your focus state also needs to have a 3:1 ratio between the focus state and the normal state, so you can tell that it's been highlighted. In that first example where I just used the yellow button and then the yellow button for the focus, there's no way I can tell that I focused on that because it hasn't changed. So the ones that do pass here are the ones that are, the hover state is significantly different. So that one in the middle, the red and the blue, that works, although it's horrible color combination. The one at the bottom is what we actually use, which is we punch out, essentially, we just outline the button. So that's a significant change to the colors without being off brand. That said, you can get away with this by other means. So a keyboard focus indicator can take different forms. The criterion does not specify what that form is, which I took from that RCAG article down there at the bottom. So you can apply a visual style such as a border, which means they're no longer reliant on the color. So in this case, I've used a thick border, like 2 pixels or something around that focus button, which means I can keep the background exactly the same because it's not dependent on the color anymore for me to identify what that is. That middle one fails because even though I've added a thicker border, it's very subtle to actually see the difference between the two. And if you're really struggling, you can do a double border. So that's a way to get around some situations where you need to have a certain border state, which makes it very hard to then find a color which contrasts enough for the alternative border state. You could add an extra border in essentially, which could be, you know, a significantly different color. So all of these would work. Also acceptable is not applying any focus styling at all. So something that I didn't know a lot about until I started looking at accessibility is the fact that you can define colors in your browser. So you can tell it what text color and what background color you want everything to be, and it will try and apply that to things that don't have any specific styles applied to them. Sadly, that falls down a lot of the time in trying to use it because most of the things will have a some sort of styling applied to it. It's very rare actually that you come across things that don't have backgrounds or font colors applied. But you know, there we go. I realize I'm eating up a lot of time here, so I'm just going to skip through these a bit faster. But inputs require there to be enough contrast between the background and the inside of the input. But if there isn't, then you need a border. So in the case where the inside of the input and the outside of the input is the same color, then you have to have a border, and it has to have 3:1 ratio, otherwise you can't tell that it's an input. But if there's enough color contrast between the two, then you don't need a border. So like those two examples at the bottom, that you've got a white input with a black background color, then the border is irrelevant at that point because you can tell that it's an input. Disabled elements, these don't have to have any color contrast at all because they're disabled. So they're not something anyone actually has to be able to click on or interact with. And therefore, it doesn't matter if they can't be seen. It basically boils down to that. Radio controls, so components must continue to have contrast in different states. So radio buttons in this example, all these are fine because you can tell the selected states from the not selected states regardless of color. You can still tell that, you know, that it's been filled in or there's an extra border or something. We had some radio buttons that it wasn't anywhere near as clear to see which one was highlighted, and we've adjusted that now, and we now use the kind of punched out style, like inverted style for the inactive states. Yeah, I'm not sure what point I was making there, but yeah, so you need 3:1 ratio between states. So if you've got buttons that follow a similar style, there needs to be enough kind of 3 times difference between those buttons to be able to tell that they're not the same state. If they're all representing the same state, then they can all be the same. But if they're different states, you need to be able to tell the difference. Oh yeah, and hue must not be the only way to tell the different state. So it can't rely on just color alone. The working group regards link color that meets the 3:1 contrast ratio relative to non-linked text color as satisfying this success criteria. So that's the sort of thing you'll find in OrCAD documentation. You have to kind of read it a few times to really understand what it means. Yeah, I'm going to move on. So in this example, it's not clear which state which state is the active one. That's essentially what that's boiling down to, is what I'm just about to talk about, which is it's not clear which one's the active one until you add a third button, and then only one of them can be active. So therefore, you know which one is the active one, because by process of elimination, it can't be the other two because there's more of them. But just on their own, you can't tell which one's the active one. So you need some other identifier to tell you which one is the active one. And that can be as simple as adding like a bullet point, like I've done here. So these ones which were failing up here are now passing. Some of these are now passing because you can tell without the need for color which one is the active one. And then, yeah, I went into a little bit of detail here about how we actually applied this to our websites and highlighted a few things which were not passing color contrast correctly, and where they were failing, so what colors needed to be changed and things like that. As I say, Color Review is a very good website. I recommend using it. Yeah, and that's my last slide. So that's as far as I got with that. But I'm hoping that will give you some insight into the fact that color contrast isn't quite as straightforward as it first seems, and that the WCAG guidelines are a little bit hard to interpret. But once you've got it right, then you can just start applying these things to websites and apps and things quite quickly, and you can get quite a lot of success in a short amount of time once you've got those kind of rules nailed. So that's pretty much all I've got to talk about. I realise I've gone over a little bit on time, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has, if anyone's got any. But if not, thank you very much for listening, and thank you to Lee and the PHP Hampshire team for having me as a speaker tonight.